The wind dragged across the tarmac in jagged waves, sweeping light snow around the ankles of parked jets like a restless ghost. Emily Carter stood at the edge of the flight line, perfectly still beside an aircraft that hadn't been powered in days. Her boots sank slightly in the frozen runoff, her flight suit stiff with cold, and her hands rested at her sides as if she had nowhere else to be. Inside the ready room, pilots sipped bad coffee and laughed loud enough to cover the awkwardness of ignoring her. One leaned toward the window and smirked, called her Benchwarmer Barbie, and the others cracked up like it was the best joke of the morning. No one lowered their voice, and no one looked away when the youngest tech posted her picture to the crew chat, with the caption frozen at the gate. She didn't react. Her eyes stayed locked toward the end of the runway where the active jets taxied, engines warming wings, slicing through gusts of snow like razors. Her name didn't flash on the assignment board. It hadn't in weeks. Jet 27. Beside her sat lifeless. Ice framed the intakes, frost coated the canopy, and no crew had touched it, not even for inspection. The silence around her was its own kind of punishment, but she held position like a statue carved from precision and patience. Then the siren hit. It didn't rise gently. It struck like metal splitting concrete. Inside, coffee cups dropped. The heater fans cut out. Boots hit the floor and chairs scraped hard. Orders flew and people sprinted. Emily Carter moved. And 19 seconds later, no one was laughing. Emily Carter never needed the spotlight. At 34, she had learned the power of silence and the discipline that came with doing hard things without witnesses. She didn't seek applause or promotion. She just wanted to be ready. She grew up near a small base in South Dakota, where the sound of jets overhead was as familiar as the wind. Her father, a seasoned pilot, used to sit with her on the porch and name aircraft by sound alone. When his plane went down during a rescue mission overseas, Emily was only 16, but she never forgot the folded flag or the hollow salute. That moment didn't break her. It hardened her focus. She finished high school early, applied to every aviation scholarship she could find, and got into a program that didn't see many women succeed. She didn't try to blend in. She tried to be better. Her instructors described her as unnervingly exact. She ran simulations longer than anyone else, took extra shifts on weather briefings, and memorized manuals front to back. While others laughed off drills or skipped them altogether, she ran hers until she could perform them with her eyes closed. At the current base, she stood out in all the wrong ways. She didn't go to poker nights. She didn't drink with the guys or post pictures from the gym. She didn't have a nickname, didn't trade jabs in the locker room, and didn't make excuses when flights got scrubbed. She just showed up, every day, on time, in full gear. Some called her cold. Others called her stuck up. No one tried to understand her. She wasn't there to impress them. She was there because she believed flying was a sacred responsibility, not a career badge. In the evenings after dinner and lights out, she stayed behind in the hangar or her bunk, tracing the startup sequence of an FA-18 on a laminated schematic. She had it taped to her desk, worn at the edges. Pencil marks faded from repetition. She practiced with a stopwatch. 18 seconds. 17. Then back to 19. She timed every gesture like it mattered, even though no one was watching. She didn't have a flight assignment. Not for weeks. Her helmet was still locked in a case in the gear room. Her name had been moved off the active board, but she kept rehearsing. When snow fell at night, she walked the line of jets and stopped beside the same one every time. Jet 27. Cold, unused, pushed to the far end of the tarmac. She never climbed in. She just stood next to it. Gloved hand resting against the metal for a few seconds. Quiet breath curling into the dark. She never told anyone what she was doing. Never asked if it was okay. She did it because she believed you don't wait to be chosen. You prepare. You sharpen until someone notices. And even if they don't, you're still ready. That kind of mindset doesn't fit well in a place built on ego and hierarchy. But Emily didn't bend. She kept showing up even when it meant standing alone. That was the part no one understood. They saw silence as weakness. They thought her stillness meant surrender. But Emily Carter was never still out of fear. She was still because she was waiting for the moment she knew would come. And when it did, she would be ready. The Airbase ran on routine reputation and rank. Pilots earned call signs like medals, some from war stories, others from bar fights, but all of them mattered. The locker rooms buzzed with shorthand pride voices echoing with familiarity that belonged to those who'd been accepted. Each name was scribbled in bold marker across helmet bags and storage tags, even on the side of coffee mugs. Nicknames came fast and stuck hard like branded proof of brotherhood. Emily Carter had none. Her nameplate had been shifted to the far edge of the gear room above a locker nobody opened. Her helmet stayed locked behind a pad she didn't have the code to reset. When the scramble board rotated names, hers never blinked. Most didn't say anything to her directly. They didn't need to. Their silence was curated clean, sharp enough to draw blood. The younger crew called her Ghost Pilot. The older ones didn't call her anything at all. In group chats, photos circulated of her standing alone beside Jet 27, snow curling at her boots. The captions were lazy, but cruel. Benchwarmer Barbie. Jet decor. One even said she was stationed there to keep the plane from rusting. They laughed behind glass in heated trailers and ready rooms filled with loud opinions. Emily never looked up, never asked, never replied. That somehow made them laugh more. The division wasn't loud. It was layered into the walls. Officers passed over her name during assignments, pretending it wasn't on the list. Briefing rooms fell quiet when she entered. Conversations pivoted the moment she sat down. No one questioned her qualifications. They didn't have to. They just acted like she wasn't needed. Not now. Not here. Maybe not ever. The base thrived on hierarchy, not just in command, but in comfort. There were favorites and there were extras. Emily was the latter, and everyone knew it. She didn't drink, didn't flirt, didn't join in the rituals of shared bravado. That made her an outsider. Not because she failed, but because she refused to fake. And outsiders on this base were treated like shadows, present, functional, but not part of the story. The cold wasn't just outside. It pulsed through the vents and lingered in how people looked past her instead of at her. It settled into routines. Orders came through that never included her name. Missions launched with no seat reserved. She got used to it. The lockers, the silence, the shift in posture when she walked by. But getting used to something doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It just means you learn to carry it quietly. She watched other pilots boast about hours they barely earned. She saw them given chances she wasn't even allowed to apply for. Their mistakes got second tries. Her silence got misread as incompetence. The hardest part wasn't the jokes or the group texts. It was knowing how capable she was and still being invisible. Knowing she could outperform half of them blindfolded and still standing in the snow while they spun up engines. No one told her to quit. No one had to. The message was loud in its silence. You don't belong. You won't fly. You're not part of this. But Emily stayed. Not out of pride. Not to prove them wrong. She stayed because she believed that even in places where recognition is rationed, readiness isn't. She kept her checklist sharp. She watched the rotation schedules. She stood beside Jet 27 not to be noticed, but because she had memorized every inch of it. They didn't know that. They didn't care. And one day, they would be the ones watching, from behind glass, while she moved with the quiet grace of someone who prepared long before anyone was paying attention. The lights in the bunk room stayed low after curfew. Fluorescent tubes hummed above the gray panel walls, just loud enough to remind her she was alone. Emily sat at the desk with her back straight and her shoulders square, her breath barely audible against the faint rush of the vent. In front of her, a worn schematic of the FA-18's cockpit was taped flat. The corners had curled from use and the pencil lines had darkened from hundreds of passes. She traced each sequence by memory fingertip, hovering just above the paper. Her stopwatch clicked once every second, its small red hand stuttering forward. She pressed it, moved through the startup routine, then pressed it again. 19 seconds. She frowned, reset, and did it again. Without a simulator, she improvised. She had drawn the panel outlines herself from memory matching scale by instinct. The controls were imaginary, but her motions were exact. Every toggle, every press, every slide of her fingers followed the real sequence. She didn't whisper the steps out loud. She didn't need to. They lived in her. Battery master, APU, fuel flow, oxygen bypass. Her hands moved in silence, the only sound coming from the tick of the stopwatch and the occasional breath. Next to her sat a cloth for wiping frost, a backup battery tag, and a pencil with a worn eraser. None of it mattered to anyone but her. She didn't log the hours. No one did. Every night followed the same rhythm. She timed, corrected, repeated. The precision gave her comfort. The silence wasn't empty. It was discipline. She practiced until her eyes blurred, and the paper began to wrinkle under her touch. Then she folded the page gently, slid it into a binder she kept for herself, and placed the stopwatch in its tray. Her gloves stayed under the pillow palms pressed flat, like hands folded in patience. In the morning, no one would know. No one would care. But she would be sharper, quieter, ready. The corridor lights dimmed after shift change. Fluorescents buzzed behind the closed doors of the ready room, casting long, flickering shadows across the cold tile. Emily stepped quietly, her boots soft against the floor, her parka unzipped just enough to let the night air settle on her skin. Outside, the wind met her like an old routine. Snow dusted the edges of the catwalks, gathering in quiet drifts along the rear pad. The air hung still, not yet freezing, but sharp enough to bite if you stood too long. She walked the same path every night, boots crunching through thin frost, her pace steady, like a song she didn't need to think about. Past the fuel tanks, past the generator boxes between rows of sleeping aircraft. They towered in the dark like dormant giants. Jet 27 waited at the end, parked under a dying floodlight. Its canopy reflected nothing. Frost wrapped around the intakes and along the rear stabilizer, thin lines drawn by wind and time. No one had touched it. Emily slowed when she reached it. She didn't rush. She never rushed. Her steps fell into the same prints she'd made the night before and the night before that. She stood beside the fuselage, tilted her head back, and let her eyes trace the nose cone to the tail. Her hand rose slowly, not to press or grip, just to hover, fingers twitching once, twice. Then she mimicked a switch toggle, then another. There was no sound but the wind. Her breath curled white and vanished. The panels remained shut. The ladder stayed latched. She circled the jet once, each footfall placed with care. She paused at the rear wheel, bent slightly, and pressed her gloved hand into the snow beside the tire. The cold didn't startle her. Rising again, she moved to the front. Her palm touched the lower panel near the intake, just long enough to remember what it felt like, just long enough to let it matter. Then she turned. Her tracks led away from the jet in a quiet line, quickly fading behind her. The night did not thank her. The base stayed silent. But she walked back with the calm of someone who didn't need permission. She already knew she belonged. The siren hit like a steel pipe across concrete. It didn't rise, it erupted, one long, screaming note that cut through walls and froze breath mid-sentence. Inside the ready room, chairs scraped back in unison. Boots slammed to the floor, coffee spilled, ignored. Voices overlapped with urgency as assignments barked through comms and names flashed across the scramble board in sharp bursts of orange. Pilots sprinted. Doors flew open. Mechanics rushed toward power sleds and fueling rigs. Everything became motion, a loud, focused chaos built on muscle memory and practiced panic. Jet 12. Lit first, then 19, then 3. Each aircraft came alive in sequence as crews shouted checklists and prepped ladders. The tarmac turned into a moving puzzle. People filled every piece. Emily Carter stood still. She was already on the pad, already beside Jet 27, already exactly where she always was. But her name didn't blink. Her jet didn't register. The system read both as inactive. No one looked her way. No orders called her in. In the chat thread, a new photo popped up. Her again. Same pose, same jet. Caption said, "Still waiting for permission." Someone laughed. Another pilot running past tossed a line over his shoulder. Something about how at least she wouldn't clog the lanes. No one expected a response. Emily didn't move. The base howled around her. Engines spun, turbines screamed, and footsteps scattered like hail on concrete. The board updated again. All slots filled, all jets accounted for. Except hers. The crew chief closest to her didn't bother shouting. He just waved her off, barely glancing up from his console. The jet beside her sat dark frost still curling over the canopy. Emily didn't blink. The wind kicked powder across her boots. Radios spat numbers through static. Ground staff hauled cables and hoses across the pad in wide arcs. The world turned kinetic. She stayed. Then her fingers moved. Just a touch resting briefly against the gloves hooked at her belt. Her stance shifted. Barely. But it shifted. And the air felt different. Heavier. No one noticed. Not yet. But the clock had started. and something quiet had just begun. Emily turned toward Jet 27 like she had every night, but this time her steps didn't stop at the edge. She crossed the final few feet with calm precision, snow parting softly under her boots. The ladder was frozen. She grabbed it, barehanded, metal biting into her skin. She climbed without pause, each rung a steady count she'd memorized 100 times. The canopy shimmered with frost. She keyed the manual release, her hand steady, breath low. It cracked, then slid open with a groan that no one could hear through the wind. She slid into the seat. No helmet, no checklist, no hesitation. Her fingers found the controls before her eyes even dropped. Battery master, APU, fuel isolation, left hand on oxygen bypass, right hand bracing the throttle gate. She didn't look. She didn't need to. Outside, a ground tech started shouting. Not at her, just to the tower, just to say someone was inside a jet that wasn't cleared. Static answered back. Inside the cockpit, Emily exhaled once. She didn't speak, didn't look around. She tapped the throttle. The first cough of ignition came like a dare. Then the roar. Heat blasted snow in curling spirals across the pad. The canopy began to sweat. Frost lines peeled from the edges in strips of steam. People turned, slowly. Disbelief didn't move fast, but recognition did. She adjusted flaps, checked brakes, released gear locks with one fluid motion. The wheels responded. The jet inched forward. Jet 27 wasn't supposed to move. It wasn't even on the board, but it rolled with purpose, now slicing tracks into the frost like it had been waiting. Her hands never lifted from the controls. Her gloves stayed hooked at her belt. Her face didn't flinch. By the time the tower asked who was flying, the question had already answered itself. Jet 27 was airborne, and Emily Carter was gone. All in 19 seconds. The sky above the base was a flat sheet of steel. No stars. No moon. Just the endless stretch of cold air pressing against the canopy like glass. Emily held Jet 27 steady beneath the clouds, her altimeter dark, her HUD lifeless. There were no voices in her ear, no blips on the radar, only the faint hum of the engines and the whisper of frost burning off the canopy's edge. Her hands worked without thought, adjusting trim, reading the wind through the slight shifts in resistance. Below, the land was all broken white. Ice veins twisted through shallow ridges. Frozen lakes spread like shattered mirrors. She tracked their shapes by memory, using them like landmarks. The contact had appeared once. Just a sliver. A streak of dark pulled from the horizon. She caught the direction. She calculated the time. That was all she had. Now she followed something that wasn't supposed to be there. No lock-on, no code, no signal, just instinct and a shape too clean to be wind. She adjusted by feel, small corrections, left pressure, nose tilt, wind drift. Every twitch of her fingers drew from 100 silent rehearsals. Jet 27 flew cold. No nav data, no markers, but the machine responded to her like it always had. Sharp, smooth, obedient to touch. She stayed just under the shelf line. Cloud vapor curled behind her like faded ink. She watched the shadows on the ice shift as she gained ground. Not fast, not far, just enough. In the silence, time lost its shape. Seconds didn't count. What mattered was rhythm, the pulse of the jet, the breath in her chest. The silhouette appeared again, just ahead, dark, angular, gliding low. She didn't chase. She mirrored. There were no orders to follow, no map to guide her, just her own belief that she was exactly where she needed to be. No one else would understand. But up here, that didn't matter. Up here, she wasn't waiting. She was working. And the sky had finally opened. The object held its course just ahead of her. It flew clean dark against the snow sky. No lights, no sound, like it had been pulled from a blueprint and placed into motion. Emily adjusted trim by instinct, not command, staying just behind its left wing arc. She didn't rush. She didn't waver. The distance between them stayed exact, measured not by calculation but by feel. It moved like it expected to be followed. She read its weight by the way it shifted in the air. Not human, not evasive, just deliberate. Every tilt of its frame was slow and sure, like it was testing her pace. Her jet answered like breath, a slight lean into wind, nose up half a degree, engine pitch smoothing into steady resonance. Nothing sharp, nothing loud, just motion wrapped in silence. The two aircraft moved together now, not in pursuit, not in contact, but in rhythm, a formation not given, chosen. Emily kept her eyes forward, not to scan, to listen, every part of her focused on staying parallel, left stick pressure, tap of rudder, maintain balance. She imagined what it looked like from the ground, one shadow trailing another, no comms, no broadcast, just a quiet symmetry hanging in the cold. The object banked left, smooth, not sharp. She followed. Jet 27 held the arc without hesitation. The air between them didn't ripple. Up here there was no time, only motion, only the slow, looping breath of machines in sync. It turned again, eastbound. She followed again, not to chase, to accompany. She didn't ask what it was. She didn't try to guess. What mattered was that she was there, that her jet responded, that her hand stayed steady. For the first time it felt like the sky saw her, not just as a name or a rank, but as a pilot, a presence. They flew like that for 30 seconds, maybe more, maybe less. Then it drifted higher, and Emily stayed level. She had what she came for. Not answers, not validation, just alignment. For once the silence around her wasn't exclusion, it was respect. Emily brought Jet 27 back, just as the sun slipped beneath the edge of the clouds. The sky had turned pale blue again, a flat wash of color that held no warmth. She descended clean lined up with the strip like she had flown it in her mind 100 times. There was no voice in her ear, no confirmation, no instructions, just the low, steady tone of her engine and the rhythmic feel of the gear locking into place. She touched down so gently the tires barely marked the snow. The jet rolled straight brakes, catching in perfect time. No skid, no correction. Her fingers stayed firm on the controls. The tower said nothing. Inside, Tex leaned forward, eyes on the screen, waiting for the transponder to flash. It didn't. Her flight path had no tag, just a moving dot, logged under one word: unknown. She taxied to the same pad she had stood beside that morning. Jet 27 returned to its place like it had never left. The frost had begun to melt in thin arcs under the belly. No one approached. No ladders moved. No ground crew signaled. Only a few silhouettes stood near the bay doors watching. The engine spun down in slow harmony. Heat lifted from the vents, creating a shimmer in the cold. The snow drifted lightly, carried sideways by a soft crosswind. Emily opened the canopy without rush. The glass hissed against the frame. Steam curled from the cockpit like breath from still lips. She climbed down the ladder one rung at a time. Boots met snow that hadn't been there when she launched. Her footsteps left a new trail, quiet, unbroken. People stared, but no one moved. The crew chief who once joked about rust didn't lift his head. The pilot who had snapped her photo didn't raise his phone. Not this time. She walked back the way she came. Straight line. No words. The scramble trailer door was half open. Light spilled onto the concrete. Someone inside reached to close it, then stopped. She passed through the line of silent stairs like fog passing trees, present but untouched. Behind her the jet cooled without sound. The snow began again, soft, steady, covering the tracks she left. But for a moment they had been there, clear, direct, proof. No one clapped, no one spoke. But every person knew exactly what they had just witnessed, and none of them would forget it. The footage played on loop in the command tent. No audio, just a shaky feed from the pad camera showing Emily approaching Jet 27. The time code ticked. From the moment her hand touched the ladder to the point the jet left the ground, 19 seconds passed. No one spoke. A junior analyst played it again, then again, each time slower, each time with a deeper crease in his brow. The officer behind him said nothing, just watched, arms folded, eyes locked on the screen. In the hallway, a few pilots gathered near the windows. Jet 27 had just parked in its original spot. The canopy was cracked open. Steam lifted from the vents like breath. No crew moved to greet her. No one offered a hand. The heat melted a ring of frost beneath the engine, marking proof that it had flown. The snow around her boots was untouched. She climbed down like she had climbed up, steady, alone. She walked back across the ramp with her gloves still hanging from her belt. No one stopped her. No one dared. In the ready room, the same tech who posted her photo earlier had his phone in his pocket now. He didn't raise it, didn't joke, just watched as she passed the threshold. Her name never came up over comms, but her flight path had been logged, not manually, automatically, tagged as resolved, then cleared, just a blip that left a perfect curve in the system. The pilot who once joked about rusting metal stood near the coffee machine staring out the window. He didn't pour a cup, didn't move when someone called his name. His jaw tightened, then dropped, but he said nothing. A mechanic sat near the auxiliary terminal, hands still wrapped in gloves. He had seen the exhaust melt through the ice, watched the startup lights go green in sequence. He leaned back in his chair and let the silence sit there. No one had expected her to move. No one had believed she was capable, but now the evidence sat outside, humming soft heat into the air, leaving no room for denial. There was no celebration, no applause, no sudden reversal of rank or status, just the weight of knowing, the kind of shift that doesn't arrive with ceremony but lands all the same. For the first time, no one laughed. Not behind her, not beside her, not even to themselves, because what she had done didn't just break expectation, it rewrote it. Recognition didn't come with a medal, it came with stillness, and the way no one met her eyes. Emily Carter never chased the spotlight. She didn't ask for a seat at the table. She didn't lobby for attention or push her way into missions. Instead, she trained in silence. Every night, every breath, every motion sharpened until it lived in her skin. She didn't prepare for praise. She prepared because she believed readiness was its own kind of truth, a promise you make to yourself, long before anyone gives you permission to prove it. For weeks, they looked past her. They measured worth by noise and numbers. But while others performed for recognition, Emily rehearsed for reality. She stayed ready when no one believed she mattered. Then, the moment came. Without warning, without invitation, and in 19 seconds she showed what discipline, integrity, and quiet strength really look like. She never asked for recognition. She never raised her voice. But in 19 seconds, she redefined power. If this story moved, you share it with someone who's ever been doubted. Let them know that staying ready isn't about being seen. It's about knowing your worth when no one else does.